Clearly, in the life of Jesus, he was used to people saying nasty things to him. That's what got Jesus up on the cross. When he was traveling that cross out Mount Calvary, there were people jeering at him, laughing at him, scoffing him. One person even sliced his side with a lance. So he was used to having negative things said about him. But today's gospel reading, coming out of the 3rd chapter of Mark, verses 20 to 35, a group of people say something to Jesus that I think when it comes to the humanity of Christ, it might have really hurt him. Now, in the divinity of Christ, because Christ had two natures, he knew it was coming. But it is the humanity of Christ that I think we can all understand. The divinity is something I aspire to. The humanity of Christ is something I identify with. And when this group of people said this negative thing to him, I think it stung more than perhaps anything else. Let's take a look at verse 20b to see what they said to him. And there it is. For they said, he, Jesus, is out of his mind. Now, when you look at that, what I want to ask is this. I just read the gospel reading, and that occurs at the very beginning of the gospel, because the gospel is verse 20 to 35, 3rd chapter of Mark. Now, when it said, for they said, he is Jesus is out of the mind, who can anyone identify the people who said this to him and about him? Does anyone remember? Who said this? And I think of all the people that said negative things to Jesus and all his adversaries traveling that cross up Mount Calvary. They said a lot of things. They hurt him. Obviously, they would kill him. But this had a really, really sting. Who said that? Any idea? His friends, neighbors, and somewhat a group of people even stronger and mostly more connected than friends and neighbors. Let's take a look at the entire verse of 20. Now here it is. This is verse 23rd chapter of Mark. Jesus came home with his disciples. Again, the crowd gathered, making it impossible for them to even eat. And there it is, with his relatives. When his relatives heard of this, they set out to seize him, and they said, that's his relatives, he, Jesus, is out of his mind. That's his family. You know, it's one thing you can have a complete stranger say something to you, and maybe, well, what are you going to expect? But this is family. Family said that he is out of his mind. Family said that he's crazy. That had to really hurt. You see, sometimes in life, it is your family, your friends, those closest to you, they can be your quickest critics. Now, every family, or maybe that's too exclusive, most families have what they call the black sheep. Most families have what is called the character of the family. The one person you never know what they're going to do. Now, growing up, my family had a character. One of my mom's oldest brothers, my Uncle Frank, he was the character. And whenever we would get together, my mom and her sisters and their brothers, they would always invite him because he was a brother. But my mom would tell her two sons, myself, and my aunts would tell their children, look, keep an eye on Uncle Frank, because he's going to do something. We don't know what. So if you see him doing anything, report back to us. Now, personally, I was excited every time he showed up, because this guy was going to light it up. So you'd be there at the party, and you say to yourself, well, I hope Uncle Frank shows up, and he gets here, things are going to start happening. I love when he showed up. When I would see his car pull into the driveway, I was one of the most excited guys going, because I knew I don't know what he's going to do. He's going to do something. And whatever he does, usually it's going to make my mom and her sisters really, really upset. I loved him. I remember I did his funeral. As a priest already when I did his funeral. He was the character. He was the character of the family. And after the funeral, we had the meal afterwards. And toward the end of the meal, after friends and other people left, it was down to just family. And we were huddled around a couple of tables, and we were telling stories about Frank, their brother Frank, my Uncle Frank. And what I found amazing when we're telling these stories, we're all laughing. Every story had humor to it, but when the story occurred, it angered, not humor. And everyone's telling these stories, and we're just laughing. And it's what really holds our family together, those Frank stories. Those are still dynamite stories. And I remember the family gathering after my Uncle Frank died. It could be summed up in one word: boring. Because my Uncle Frank was the guy that the entire time my mom and her sisters would be watching. Keep him away from the punch. Keep him away from that cabinet over there. That's where the stuff's at he's trying to get to. But he sure did bring color to the family. It turned out to be that he was really, really important character. He was beautiful. You see, it's the characters, those in our families that are somewhat crazy. They're out of their minds, but they're the ones that bring beauty to the world. If the world was full of people just like me, this would be a really boring world. It's the characters. It's those that you never know what they're going to do. And so you're holding your breath the whole time they're at your gathering. You're on your toes because you know this much. Before this night is over, he's going to say something, do something. You just don't know. You know, in India, there's this little village in India. And in this little village, they don't have any running water. There is a man in this village in India that he has one job and one job only. He's what is known as the water supplier. And 4 times a day, this man would get his 2 5-gallon ceramic pots. And he fastens these pots, one to the left side of the pole and one to the right side of the pole. And then he lifts up that pole and he puts it over his shoulders. And 4 times a day, he walks out to a spring about a half a mile from the village. And he loads up those pots with 5 gallons of water on one and 5 gallons of water in the other. And then he walks back to the village to supply the villages with water. He does that 4 times a day. He started to notice that when he would get back from the spring of water half a mile from the village, that the pot on the right only had about half of the water. Well, he looked at it, examined it, noticed there was a little crack in the ceramic of that pot. He tried to fix that little crack, but he wasn't able to fix it. He didn't have the resources to buy another pot. He didn't want to waste the water, so he's trying to figure out what can I do to be productive with the water. I'm walking all this water back to the village. These things are really heavy. Water is 8 pounds a gallon. What should I do about this little fracture in the ceramic? And then he realized what he was going to do was this. One day he got a lot of flower seeds, and he planted flower seeds along the path for half a mile from the village over to the spring. And 4 times a day when he would put that pole over his shoulders, full initially of 5 gallons of water on both sides. And when he would walk back to the village, the pot on the right side with this fracture, with this crack, would leak water. And 4 times a day, that leaking water would water those flower seeds. And eventually those flower seeds started to sprout flowers. And the flowers became beautiful, big and lush and colorful and beautiful. And the villagers always would comment on the beauty of that path, how on the one side of the path it is so absolutely gorgeous that those flowers make the world a more beautiful place. You know what the moral of that story is? It is the crackpots in life that make life beautiful. And that's what that's talking about. They said Jesus is out of his mind. He's crazy. But he changed the world for the better because being somewhat of a crackpot, who would do what he did? Who would love people despite the fact they hated him? Who would die on a cross for people, and just before he dies, he says, "What? Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing." Who would do that? Someone who's out of their mind, someone who's crazy, someone who's a crackpot. And think about your life. I think about my uncle often. We get together, especially with my brother and my cousins. We always talk about my Uncle Frank. He was our crackpot. How I miss him, because family gatherings are never the same. When I would see his car pull in, I just got so excited. I knew he was going to make my aunts and my mom mad, and that was really happy. Just knowing that made me happy. But your family probably has one, and you might have a couple in your family. But just remember this, if you have one living among you, how important it is because it is the crackpots of our lives that make life beautiful.